started down here. The Alabama Gates is right here. That's where we're at. This is just a very old map that I have sitting kind of in the back behind my desk that I grabbed to just give you a picture. So LA Aqueduct intake is here, and we have all these different spill gates that a lot of them are used for enhancement mitigation projects that we provide water to. One thing Larry didn't mention as part of LORP is our Black Walk waterfowl management area. We flood it for waterfowl. This time of year, waterfowl start coming through, and particularly in the winter time, it's big hunting season, so we flood it for them at that time. So yeah, I think that's probably it on the map. I'm going to set it down. Someone wants to just step on it or something for me. Keep it from flying away. All right, so I think there's a couple different topics we hit. One is I can tell you a little bit about how we operate the aqueduct, how we operate, and operating the aqueduct, it happens way before we operate the aqueduct, or way before we get to the aqueduct, and then talk a little bit about well field management and groundwater pumping. So this is going to be a good year to demonstrate how we manage for groundwater, in that it starts as that snow starts to melt. A ton of water is going to be coming off. You're already seeing it. Normally the aqueduct isn't this high this time of year. It's got a lot of rain. It's also very turbid, right? All the water coming off is taking sediments with it. But as the runoff really kicks off, it's more than the aqueduct can handle. This can probably go up to about 850 CFS. It's a lot of water. It's not too terribly far there from now. I didn't check before I went, or before I came. So what do you do with that water? We spread it. We take it up on the alluvial fans, and you divert it out of the creeks. And so that serves two purposes. One, if this were to get too high, we do have emergency spills, but then it'll undermine, and then if it hits bare soil, you're washing out your aqueduct, and you can lose the entire aqueduct. So that's the big reason for spreading. The other one is you're recharging groundwater, right? You're putting groundwater back there, you're banking it for later. So that's a big part of the operations during a high runoff. And then during drought years, the groundwater is available to be pumped to supplement the surface water that's not available. The reason Alabama Gates is a historic structure, it is the last really place you can turn out water and put it back into the valley. So there's been numerous times 50, 60 years ago where various parties have come and taken a hold of the Alabama Gates and turned the water back out into the Owens River, which is right out there. So interesting stories in that people have, for days, it's been a big party taking over LA Aqueduct, and then people get tired and go home. Let's see. So the other thing, the reason this was built was this is where it turns. I didn't point it out, but as you go that way, it's unlined. The aqueduct is unlined. It is just dirt at that time. It's just essentially a ditch. So that you collect sediment at that point. So you don't want sediment to fill your concrete line. So right here, it's a bit of an eddy, so sediment drops out. So this structure was built to operate, to pull the gates and flush that sediment out so it doesn't build up in the line channel. We do not operate it like that anymore. You see various piles. This is all sand that has been pulled out. So we go in with an excavator, we pull it out. We don't slush it out anymore.
Do you still flood though? And how often?
No, this is just used as an emergency. When it's used because there's been a thunderstorm event or something. And what has happened is the Lower Owens River, because of the reasons Larry stated, is kind of stagnant. There's a lot of organic material. When you push this water out, it dissolves it, and you get low oxygen, you get fish kills. So we don't use this structure unless it's really an emergency now. Let's talk a little bit about well field management. It starts with operations and spreading water. Each of these areas have different well fields that have wells for groundwater pumping. The way it's managed is there are transects that determine whether a well goes on or off. And so on these transects, you measure vegetation, and you see if the vegetation has, and you measure the soil moisture. So if the soil moisture drops below a point that the vegetation doesn't getting enough, that turns a well field off. So that's part of the very nuts and bolts of this long-term water agreement that Larry mentioned on how groundwater is managed. There's a lot of other provisions on use of water. We measure all of the water that comes into these well fields. We have measuring stations at the base of every mountain, so we know the flow. We also have measuring stations down lower, and so you know roughly how much water has infiltrated in the well field.
Oh, wow.
So there are provisions against groundwater mining. So we know if you put that much groundwater in, you can't take that much groundwater off. So it's another provision on groundwater management.
Are there any TMDLs that you have to manage?
Any what?
TMDLs that you have to manage as it goes out?
Yeah, so water quality, one of the biggest things that we're lucky we have an undeveloped watershed, so we don't have very many issues. Grazing, sometimes you have sort of E. coli we have to worry about, but it's arsenic. There are hot springs up north, and that is where a lot of the arsenic comes from. And so you passed a couple places that are plants where we add polymer and ferric chloride that binds up the arsenic and then drops out farther down. That's the biggest thing is arsenic, because we're lucky up here, being an undeveloped watershed, we don't have a lot of the inputs that you have to worry about in the city.
Cool.
Let's see. Any other questions? So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Where does the sediment go? I don't really get that. This bank's here to like funnel the sediment out?
The sediment just drops down and it piles up here. So when the water's lower, you'll see a pile of sediment. And then we just bring an excavator up here, pull it out. Yep.
About how often do you have to take the sand out of the aqueduct?
It depends on flows. With low flows, you're not getting as much sediment. Higher flows, more often. We won't have a chance to go to the LA Aqueduct intake, but there is a 100-year-old pile of sediment, because that's another point for sediment.
Is there what percentage of water gets evaporated in aqueduct?
Yeah, I mean it's open aqueduct until you get down to Haley, so there is, but I don't know offhand. The evaporation here is very high. I think at one of our lower Haley reservoirs, it's about 7 feet. Use 7 feet of water every year. So the other part of my job is land management. So you got managing not only the wildlife, but making sure vegetation is there, so you're pulling as much sediment out as possible. Fire, we have wildfires here, so managing for wildfires, reestablishing wildfires. For example, around the Owens River, we had a fire late last year. So after that happens, we develop a response plan. And luckily, we have some levers to pull. With the river, you can pulse the river. We have some opportunities to pulse the river, flood the floodplain, give the grass a pulse of moisture to encourage them to regrow. Any other questions? Over there.
How did the shells end up making it here?
Those are Asian clams. They were brought over, much like a lot of our invasive species, as a just for typical food source. And so they live in the sediment here, and when they come out, if you see fresh ones, they're actually brown. These are older shells that have been bleached. They have a brown layer on the new ones. Yeah, so that's a relatively fresh one.
Do you have those? You think that's the shell?
Oh, I found an interesting rock. Do you know what this is?
I was gonna ask you. It's like really
I don't know.
sharp.
I'm not sure. So it could be like, it looks kind of more like a
Maybe rock.
porcelain of some sort.
Like sea glass, but
Yeah.
River glass.
yeah,
Yeah, it feels like ceramic.
Yeah.
Feels like very smooth.
or tooth, really big tooth.
So I think Larry started to allude to the open space that's up here. There is, some people call it sort of a love-hate relationship between the residents and the city of LA. A lot of folks come up here because there's not too many places in California you can get this open space. And right up here, Alabama Hills is a very famous filming location. You see a couple of them. Iron Man, many westerns were filmed here. And it's because there's not too many. You can have 360 panorama and have virtually no evidence of humans. So that's the sort of cool thing that's here. Otherwise, if you compare it to other valleys, this would probably be some mix between, you probably don't know the area, Palmdale, Lancaster, very dispersed houses, and what is a little bit north of here is large tracts of alfalfa fields. So somewhere between that mix, you'd probably have it if the city of LA didn't own this, because we want, it's our watershed. We want development. So it's a sort of another happy accident. I promised a quote. He keeps asking me. So Phil Keister, he's a former Cal Fish and Wildlife guy. Great guy. He's like 80 something. He's still somewhat active. This is one of my favorite ideas that sums up the love-hate relationship, and that's the only thing worse than DWP being in the valley, DWP not being in the valley. and that sums up the sort of like, there's a lot of good, but we are the 800-pound gorilla that isn't always perfect, but as hopefully you've seen, there is change, and we are trying to address and make our other part of our mission is environmental sustainability. So to integrate that into our water.
Oh, I think that was a great quote.
All right, good. Any other last questions?